August 6, 2004, began like any other summer day in Modesto, California, until a police cruiser pulled into a quiet cul-de-sac and discovered the lifeless body of a pregnant woman tangled in a tangled mess of rope and blood. The woman was Laci Anne Peterson, a 27-year-old mother-to-be whose disappearance and murder would soon explode into a media frenzy that turned a suburban tragedy into a national obsession. Laci grew up in a modest, tight-knit family in the small town of Long Beach before moving to the Central Valley to study at Modesto Junior College. In 1997, she met Scott Lee Brown, a former Marine with a background in the Air Force Reserve and a reputation for a calm, steady demeanor. Their courtship seemed ordinary. They married in 1999, purchased a home in Modesto, and welcomed their first child, a son named Andrew, in 2001. By late 2003, the couple was expecting their second child, a baby girl. Laci worked as an accountant for the California Department of Corrections, while Scott was employed as a forklift operator at a local lumber mill. The couple appeared to embody the American dream: a loving family, stable jobs, and a bright future ahead. The nightmare began on April 24, 2002, when Laci's car was seen crossing a bridge near the San Francisco, Oakland Bay Bridge on its way to her mother's house in Modesto. She never arrived. The following day, Laci's mother, Sharon, filed a missing person report, and a massive search effort was launched. The community rallied, with volunteers combing the waterways, forests, and highways. The case drew the attention of the FBI and the California Department of Corrections because Laci was a state employee. Over the next 2 months, the search intensified, with helicopters scanning the Sacramento River and divers probing the depths. On May 12, 2002, a fisherman discovered a battered, water-logged duffel bag near the shoreline of the San Francisco Bay. Inside lay a human torso wrapped in a blanket, the limbs bound with rope. Forensic experts identified the remains as Laci's through dental records. The following week, a second bag yielded a severed head and additional body parts, confirming the horrifying conclusion. Laci had been brutally murdered, her body disposed of in the bay. The public was shocked, the nation mourned, and the press demanded answers. Suspicion quickly fell on Scott. He was the last person known to have seen Laci alive, and his alibi, claiming he had been at a baseball game in Sacramento, could not be corroborated. In June 2002, investigators found a pair of muddy shoes and a torn pair of men's socks near the San Francisco Bay, matching shoes Scott owned. Further, a search of his home uncovered a blood-stained shirt and a set of rope that matched the knots used on the duffel bags. On December 15, 2002, after months of mounting evidence, Scott Brown was arrested and charged with the murder of his pregnant wife and the kidnapping and murder of their unborn child, a charge that would later become the first in United States history to be tried under the newly enacted Unborn Victims of Violence Act. The trial began in January 2004 at the Stanislaus County Courthouse, and what followed was a media circus of unprecedented scale. Cameras lined the courtroom, nightly news shows dissected every testimony, and talk show hosts turned the case into a cultural phenomenon. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Robert D. Tisdale, presented a narrative of premeditation, arguing that Scott, burdened by financial strain and fearing the loss of child support, had meticulously planned the murder. They introduced forensic evidence: the rope, the blood spatter, and a set of fingerprints on the duffel bag that matched Scott's. A key piece of evidence was a diary entry in which Scott wrote, "If we can't get the money, we'll have to get something else to make this work." The prosecution also called Laci's mother, Sharon, whose emotional testimony painted a picture of a loving wife and mother taken from the world far too soon. The defense, headed by veteran attorney Mark J. O'Brien, sought to dismantle the circumstantial nature of the evidence. He argued that the rope and the blood-stained shirt could have been planted, pointing to inconsistencies in the timeline of the search, and suggesting that the real perpetrator was a serial killer operating along the bay. O'Brien introduced an alternative suspect, a known sex offender who had been in the area at the time of Laci's disappearance. He also emphasized Scott's lack of a criminal record and his apparent grief, urging the jury to consider reasonable doubt. Throughout the trial, the media fixated on every twist. The public was divided. Some saw Scott as a cold-blooded murderer, while others believed he was a victim of a wrongful accusation. The case ignited a broader conversation about media influence on the judicial process, the treatment of victims' families, and the newly codified legal status of unborn children. The courtroom itself became a stage, with live-streamed testimony and a 24-hour news cycle that turned legal arguments into sound bites. After 4 weeks of testimony and a week of deliberations, the jury returned on April 13, 2004. The foreperson stood, read the verdict, and declared Scott Brown guilty on all counts: first-degree murder of Laci Peterson, second-degree murder of an unborn child, and the illegal disposal of a human body. The sentence was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 25 years for the murder of the unborn child. Subscribe to the verdict for more stories like this.